All right, let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 10. Ecclesiastes chapter 10, we'll try to cover all of it tonight. Verse 1 says, "Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. Yea, also when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to every one that he is a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Whoso removeth stone shall be hurt therewith, and he that cleaveth wood shall be endangered thereby. If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. Surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow up himself. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be, and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season, for strength and not for drunkenness. By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. The feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter." So our message tonight is titled "The Stink of Folly." In the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon's been dealing with some of the frustrations of life under the sun, as he refers to it. That is, life from the viewpoint of there being no God and no life beyond what we experience here on earth. Such a life is without purpose, other than just to try maybe enjoy what we can in the moment. There's no justice, no real right and wrong in that kind of case. There's nothing to satisfy the soul. So life is just empty and it's temporal. But as Solomon's been addressing this view of life, he's thrown in some tidbits that are truth that are gradually building. He's going to come to a final, substantial, satisfying, and eternal answer in chapter 12, and that is that the fear of God is what brings meaning and satisfaction, fulfillment in life. Now, in this true eternal view that he's presenting, instead of seeing life and all its situations as trivial and is not really having any real significance, Solomon is beginning to show how each decision and each action and each attitude, no matter how trivial they may seem, he's showing that they really have increasing magnitude as we go through life and as we gain wisdom. So life becomes an experience that demands great wisdom, divine wisdom. And as Solomon wrote in Proverbs 4, wisdom is the principal thing, and therefore we need to get all the wisdom we can and not forget it. It's kind of like talking about vegetables, you know. You can what you can, you can all you can. Now I can't even think of it. Get what you can all you get. That's it. You don't let any of it go to waste. You get it all and can it, provide it for another time. And this fact is something that has to be firmly planted in the soul of each adult. That is, every part of life requires wisdom. And as we go through life and we have more and more situations and more years, the outcome of those sometimes small decisions is going to make a big difference. And so we ought to have that kind of thinking when we're adults, and children who learn these things earlier in life. It makes them wise, keeps them from ruining their lives as they grow up, and it ultimately gives them great purpose and satisfaction in life. And so in chapter 10, Solomon is using a series of proverbs. They're somewhat different, and yet he is saying that true wisdom values holiness, it values diligence in seeking divine honor, but fools disregard specific instruction that we have in the Bible, what they think doesn't really matter, and therefore they suffer the shame and ruin caused by sin. That's the stink of folly. Now, he begins in verses 1 to 3 with the principal truth that this whole chapter teaches, and that is there are distinct outcomes of living wisely and living foolishly. Now, we've already seen that Solomon says sometimes you can't tell by blessing or lack of blessing whether a person is pleased with somebody's life. But that's not the point here. The point is, if we choose wisely, according to God's will, or if we don't choose wisely, the life of the person, those two different types of people, is going to be distinctly different. And Solomon begins by stating that distinctness in verse 1. He said, "Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly," those little folly, "him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor." So we may have a lot of privileges and advantages when we're born, but the question is, what kind of decision are we going to make? Now, he mentions ointment here. In the Middle East, it's often hot and dry, very dry environment. And so a lot more to them than to us. Ointments and oils are very important in dealing with the dryness and hiding the odor of perspiration. If you've been out in the western United States, when I was out there, I had to keep putting something on my lips, otherwise they would dry and crack up. And it's like that in the Middle East, very hot. And so ointment and oils and so forth are very important. And the mixing of oils and smells to get just the right combination is done by someone called the apothecary or at the apothecary. And they can be very expensive to obtain. I don't know, I hope you guys, if you're married, have bought some perfume before. But according to my nose, it's hard to find just the right smell. Something that is attractive, it smells good, but it's not overpowering or whatever. So it can be very expensive. You remember the woman in the gospel poured an oil on Jesus' feet. It cost him tens of thousands of dollars. It cost her that. And that, of course, made Judas mad, but it was because it was such an expensive oil. And so he's talking about this kind of oil or ointment If flies get in it, now they didn't use some of the preservatives and stuff that we would today, but they had. If you got something that expensive, you got to preserve it. If you get flies in it, dead flies or something like that, just a small dead fly can ruin your ointment. I mean, you don't just, oh, there's a fly in here, let's get that out. No. And usually if one fly is attracted to it, there's going to be others attracted to it. But so this is actually a parable about the effect of a little bit of folly, just a little bit of sin that can ruin your testimony, your reputation. Because it may seem like just a little bit, but just like a couple of flies could ruin tens of thousands of dollars. I think I figured out that ointment that was poured on Jesus' feet, this, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, it was about $20,000 worth. And so he's telling us right here at the start when he goes into these parables that all of life is significant to our spiritual and eternal well-being. Paul put it like this in 1 Corinthians, a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. And so we may think that something that we do or don't do is not going to have a big effect, but he says that's not the way life is. And you're going to ruin yourself spiritually if you have that view. Verse 2, he says, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. So again, he's just talking about principal truths. And the Bible, of course, the right hand is the position of honor. Jesus is the right hand of his Father. It is the location of strength and ability. It's noted if somebody's really good with their left hand, a few times in the Bible, they take note of that because that's not the normal. I think I mentioned this past Sunday, 85 to 90% of people who live are right-handed, and so the left hand represents weakness. Moral and spiritual weakness is used as a picture of that. You know, if you're right-handed, your left hand typically, there are some people who are ambidextrous. And I've always said I'd give my right hand to be ambidextrous. But in the Bible, if you're right-handed, I can't really write with my left hand. It's awkward. So left-handed sometimes represents awkwardness spiritually, morally, causes somebody, if the left is somebody that makes poor decisions, they act with lack of wisdom. And so this proverbial thinking is what's brought about today, the right and the left. When we talk about the right and the left in politics, right, we're talking about people that do right and try to make right decisions. The left represents those who are subversive. And so that's something that's been true for a long time. But the fool, he's saying, is the one who does not value, practice, and obey the truth of God. He's leaning away from, he's leaning to the left. That's the direction he's going instead of the way to the Lord and following him. And then he follows this up in this little trilogy in verse 3, yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. So the walk in the Bible, of course, always referred to the pattern and character of life, and it always shows whether a person is wise or foolish. And the outcome of whether a person follows God or follows his own way is obvious. Again, I've talked about this before. If you've got a 90-degree angle and you just get off 1 degree, it's not much at the start, but as you keep going on life, it gets wider and wider and a greater divergence. And so it becomes obvious which way a person is chosen toward the end of their life. And the choices of each is very distinct. Even a little folly a little sin is distinct from the truth. And, it's like when our children, we want to nip bad habits in the bud, so to speak. We don't wait till they get 18 or 19 and try to correct them then. We want to start when they're young. And although fools don't think so themselves, it is obvious to God. God certainly knows. He knows we may do something that looks good, but in the heart and mind it's not. He knows that. And if people are not careful, if they are not careful to practice obedience to God's word, well, his wisdom is going to fail him. In Matthew 5:19, remember Jesus said, "Whoso therefore shall break one of these least commandments and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoso shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." And that's why you have standards and rules and so forth to establish what's right. And the person who doesn't care for or like those things is a fool. We've got to be careful in obedience to the Lord and having the right actions and the right words and so forth. So that's what he's saying this whole chapter is really about. If we don't have that, it's going to be a stink on our testimony. And there are groups of several in here, and I'll try to kind of get them in order. But one of the things he talks about is the right respect of rulers. This is an important principle. Verse 4, "If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses." And we'll look at verse 20 with it in a minute. But recognition and submission to authority is key to godly wisdom. Romans 13, it says, "Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Wherefore whosoever therefore resisteth the power resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation." If this principle is tested when somebody in authority over us, whether it's a parent, a boss, teacher, whatever, gets angry with us and reproves us and corrects us. And it may be a situation where we didn't even realize that we were doing wrong or something like that. But anyway, when you get corrected, that's hard for us to take. It's against the flesh. It may appear to us in our inexperience or lack of wisdom that reproof is unjustified. And the response of the weak person, the selfish or the unruly person, to say, "I've had enough of this, I quit." And a long time ago, when I was still a young pastor, I had a much older pastor, wiser pastor, say, I was sitting in his office or somewhere talking with him. He said, something came up about somebody who got angry and they just resigned their position and so forth. And he said, when that happens, he says, I always warn them, if you quit in anger, you will not be allowed to serve here again in another position. Because it's a deeper spiritual problem. And I've remembered that a few times. I've told people that same thing because they're rebelling against God. That's what the problem is when you do that. And he says, don't do that. Don't leave your place. Take the reproof and show submission. And if you do that, if you respond properly, that will be impressive. Particularly if somebody's reading you the riot act in a spiritual position and leadership. Wisdom suffers or allows the correction and that response will pacify the displeasure. And, it's like when you get pulled by a high patrolman or something, and you're courteous and so forth, and say, if you're wrong, say, I admit it, or I didn't realize it, but you give the good response, it's going to make a big difference. But what it will show is that you've got some wisdom. And the same godly wisdom and restraint is shown when a person is not careful, when he is careful not to curse his superiors. Verse 20. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. So, we've already pointed out that authority comes from God. It is a truth that people in leadership, because God has placed them there, for whatever reason. I just read about King Saul this morning. He was put in leadership because God was judging Israel. But God put him there. And usually over a period of time, in the normal work of things, the more capable and those that have certain abilities are going to rise in leadership. That's not always the case. In fact, he talks about it in a little bit further down. But Psalm 75, verse 5 and 6, 6 and 7, For promotion cometh neither from the east nor the west or the south. God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. And so, when we get ready to be critical of somebody that God has placed there over us, they may be there just to genuinely correct some things in our lives, even if they are a fool. And if we understand reverence for God leads us to respect leaders and hold our tongues. And honestly, a lot of the times, the reason for the criticism is because the person's in that position doesn't know what they're doing. They don't understand what leadership is about. They don't know the full scope of what has to be done and how people have to work together with each other. So a guy just doing his little part in the job, he doesn't know how it fits in with everybody else. That's why he's not in leadership. But beyond that, he's given us his wisdom to receive correction. The next set of truths is the basic discernment for righteous rulers. This now is going to talk about the ruler. The first one is verses 5 to 7. He says, There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. And, I can't help but think of Biden's administration here. But I think of a few people in key positions who are men, but who dress like women. And this is the kind of thing that he's talking about. So in spite of the truth that we just covered, in God's wisdom, sometimes fools are in authority. And one of the surest signs of a fool being in leadership is that person promotes and gives positions of authority to other fools. People who are weak, people who are selfish, people who are petty, people who lack godly character. And when you have an environment like that at work, it hinders productivity, it fosters rebellion, and ultimately it brings divine judgment. And, you take somebody that's a poor worker or a person with a short fuse and you put them in leadership, you got problems. But that's what fools do. And an example of such a practice is to promote people who are slaves to their flesh. Look at verse 16 and 17. He says, Woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. You know, that verse 17 would probably infuriate the average liberal. But this is truth. He says, woe when thy king is a child. The person leading the whole land still has the nature. Let's see now. I'll ask Hannah, but maybe Mike is different from all other babies. But what do babies do when they get hungry? Most of them cry out or scream. They're going to demand your attention. Why? Because they're babies. All they know about is I'm hungry. I don't care what you're doing. I don't even know about any of that. And when you've got a ruler that all he is concerned about is how he feels and what he wants, that nation or that company or whatever it is, that family is in big trouble. So, the princes eat in the morning. Only thing he's thinking about, he's not thinking, I got this tremendous responsibility to oversee these people and direct them the right way and help them be productive. All he's thinking about is, what am I got for breakfast? That's not a very wise person. But the opposite of that, verse 17, when thy king is the son of nobles. Now that's an important word right there. And thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. Now, hunger is one of the two greatest desires that we have. It'll drive you to control you. But a noble is somebody who has learned respect, honor, discipline. They will understand that they're in leadership, not because I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, but so I can help these people. So that I could get our nation being productive, learning right from wrong and doing what's right. And that kind of person, he controls his eating. And he eats for strength, to help himself physically, not to just satisfy his own desires and be uncontrolled. They don't have the restraint of discipline that's needed for leadership. And to go back to, go down to verse 20 again, the wise are those who are careful with their tongues. This is important to leadership. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For the bird of the air shall carry the voice, and he which hath wings shall tell the matter. Well, we've got one in particular in leadership now. He doesn't care what he says. Well, that's not very smart. Wisdom in speech is essential to productive living. And what we say, it affects people. And it can cause subversion. It can cause right response. It's extremely, extremely important. Proverbs has a lot to say about our speech. And so just here's some basic parables about basic discernment for righteous rulers. And then basic wisdom for profitable labor, verses 8 to 10. He that diggeth a pit shall fall into it. Whoso breaketh an hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Whoso removeth stone shall be hurt therewith. And he that cleaveth wood shall be in danger thereby. If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. So, hard labor is full of dangers. And it's a picture of life in general. Now, I've met a high percentage of people who work with farm equipment. And it's not uncommon to be missing part of a finger or maybe an entire finger or even a hand or an arm or something like that, because it's dangerous work. And it's heavy equipment, and you better be careful in what you're doing, or you're going to suffer some injuries from it. But some of that's just a part of life. But if you're doing these kind of things and not being careful, you're foolish. Sam's working on those massive buses over there. If he doesn't respect the work that he's doing, I mean, it could kill him in just a matter of a few seconds. And life is like that. But we got to be careful. Ephesians 5, verse 15 and 16, it says, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil." It's like when you go out to shoot, you got a firearm, there's something that's a deadly tool in your hands. You've got to respect that. You've got to be wise in the way that you handle it, and using our time wisely in the same thing. We have to stay on our toes. And it's not just physical labor that's this way, it's spiritual labor as well. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23. "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." And in verse 15, he gives another principle about labor. He says, "The labor of the foolish weareth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go out to the city." Well, back up in verse 10, he said, "If the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then he must put to more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct." And then he says that in verse 15, "The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them." Well, if you're trying to cut something or chop something and your instrument, your tool is dull, it makes a big difference. It's just like mowing a yard. If your blade on your mower is not sharp, and why mow it? Because you're going to have the tough grass still sticking up where you've gone over. It looks uneven. It looks just as bad even though it's been mowed as it did before. And if you don't oil things and all that, you're going to be unproductive. But in verse 15, he's talking about why this happens a lot of the time. "The labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city." In other words, he can't see the most obvious thing before him in his work because he's never thought it was important to listen. Never thought it was important to find somebody that knows what they're doing and direct him. You can look at the city over there, you can go to it, but we're talking about work here. And so one of the reasons he doesn't like to work is because he just never listens. He can't understand the obvious thing that we're trying to do. And then verse 18 adds to that, "By much slothfulness the building decayeth, and through idleness of the hands the house droppeth through." Well, some of you, like me, live out in the country a little bit. And it used to be when I would take my mom in the car and we'd go through the country, there's something that she would always comment on. On the side of the road, there'd be this big, once stately house. But it's been left for years. The roof is caved in. It's got all these problems. And she would say something about, "My, that's a shame." Yet sometimes you're surprised to find somebody still lives in those places. It's got bricks off of the front steps. It's got hazards all around. Why? Because somebody's lazy. They don't keep up what they own. They're just taking money and setting it on fire. So by much slothfulness that building decayeth, and through the idleness of the hands the house droppeth through. But, that's why businesses have, what do they have? Continuing education. You got to keep up with the latest work. You've got to that's the reason you have a coach in sports, because you have somebody that makes sure you do it the right way. But if you get lazy, you don't do that. And so you can't be productive. Colossians 3:23 and 24, it says, "Whatsoever thy hand find to do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord you shall receive the reward and inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ." So that's even talking about the eternal value. And then the last of the set of parables is the basic instruction for wisdom and speech. Maybe I ought to leave that one's pretty important. We'll come back to that. I don't know about next Wednesday, but probably the Wednesday after. Anyway, the point is that just a little bit of folly, of foolishness, of not following the instruction of the Bible. We got 10 commandments. Okay, everybody knows those are serious. But there are plenty of other principles that have to be applied all the time, or we're going to be foolish. We're going to be late. We're not going to keep ourselves doing what we ought to do. If you don't take care of your body, it won't function the way it's supposed to. And the same way in our basic skills, spiritually, intellectually. And so, next time you go by somebody that's just kind of giving up and they're foolish, just say, well, there's somebody that's got fly in their ointment. It's a stink in the nostrils of God. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. Thank you for these kind of reminders. Lord, I pray that you'd help us who are older and experienced, and particularly who are parents, to understand our job in teaching and modeling these types of things to our children, and Lord, how we ought to do this in our church with our fellow members to provoke one another to love and good works. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.